Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Ballpark Figures. I'm really excited about our conversation tonight. We're going to talk about women and girls in baseball and softball. Um, for those of you who may not know me, I am Shakeia Taylor. I'm Curly Fro on Twitter. I've won a couple of baseball writing awards. One of them you may have heard about. And I'm really excited about tonight's guest, Jessica Luther. Jessica is an investigative journalist who has written extensively on the intersection of sports and gendered violence. Her work has appeared at Texas Monthly, Sports Illustrated, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, ESPN Magazine, Sports Illustrated, New York Times Magazine, BuzzFeed, the Texas Observer, and Huffington Post. She has written 2 books, Unsportsmanlike Conduct, College Football and the Politics of Rape, out September 2016, and Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, Dilemmas of the Modern Sports Fan, which she co-authored with Kavitha Davidson, that came out in September 2020. Jessica also co-hosts a weekly feminist sports podcast titled Burn It All Down. If you have not listened to Jessica and the other girls on Burn It All Down, I am a super fan. I love all of them individually and collectively. Jessica, hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me. I'm obviously really excited to talk to you. You have quite a bit of stands in the chat. Some people joined specifically for you, so
That's
I'm real
very
pumped.
nice. I think that's very nice. I feel like I should say right off the bat that I'm not a huge baseball person in general. So for me to be here, but I am apparently one of the experts on women in baseball. So I'm always happy to talk about that.
You are, and it's not really something people talk about a ton, right? Like, women and girls in baseball and softball kind of get erased. But before we get into that, um, I'm sure there's some people here who may not know you. Can you tell them a little bit about you, your journey as a writer, and maybe where you sit on the baseball fandom spectrum if you don't have a team?
Yeah, so I am a freelance investigative journalist. I live in Austin, Texas, and let's see, as Shakia said, I mainly am known for doing work on gendered violence in sport, a lot with football, college football in particular. I wrote the first big piece about Baylor football back in 2015. I wrote a big piece about the Dallas Mavericks, the business side in 2018, and then I was on the USA Today team that uh, did a big thing on LSU a couple years ago. And yeah, I've been Burn It All Down's almost 5 years old. So that really keeps me topical. And I know a lot more about sports in general from doing it. I also am currently the producer of a new season of American Prodigies with my friend Amira Rose Davis, who's hosting, and it's about Black gymnasts in the US. And for baseball, I'm like at the closest that I thing to a fan. I'm like that person who will watch the World Series.
Okay.
Uh, but I don't have a team. I've tried to follow baseball before. It's a huge commitment. So kudos to all of you. I always feel like this is like a lot of work whenever I try. And I fell into girls in baseball, I guess like 4 years ago. That must be right, 5 years ago. I wrote a column. I was writing a column for a women's sports site that no longer exists. And I was just trying to find a topic. And Francis Ford Coppola at the time owned a huge chunk of the Sonoma Stompers, and he had made them put women on the team. And so it was a
Mhm.
big story. And I interviewed one of the women from that team, and immediately people who care about women and girls in baseball will contact you if you write about women and girls in baseball because they're so excited that anyone is writing about it. And from there, I got a big story about a girls, I'm sure we'll talk, I don't know if we'll talk about it, but a girls travel baseball team. And I wrote a big piece in 2017 about that
Mhm.
for Bleacher Report. And from there, I just care that people don't care. And
Yeah.
so that has
Yeah.
like spurred me to continue to write about girls and women in baseball because I'm frustrated about how hard it is for them to get any kind of publicity or support, like basic resources.
Since you mentioned that 2017 profile on the All Girls Travel Baseball team, I saw that they all have major league aspirations. Can you talk about that story, but also where are they now?
Oh, that's a good. I was like, I should look up where they are now. There's a girl that starts the story, Kate Matson, and Howard Magdal wrote a piece about her recently. So she's still playing baseball. I can't remember exactly where she is in the pipeline, but yeah, I wrote it 5 years ago, and they were all 10 to 13, 14 years old. So they would just be on the edge of either they'd be in high school or going into college at this point. And I haven't kept up with them. So I'm not sure exactly where they all are. But yeah, Girls Travel Baseball is all girls travel baseball team. Uh, and someone contacted me about them almost immediately when I wrote that column back in, I guess, 2016. And I got on the phone with the guy who runs it. We talked for a few months. I love telling this story. And I knew it was a story. You know how that is, Shakeia? Like, you're like, this is something.
It starts staring like in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's something here to be said. And so I talked to him a fair amount. I did the kind of work that you have to do to pitch a story. I had some kind of idea of what I wanted to do, and I started pitching it, and I just got rejected over and over and over again from places that you wouldn't think. I'm not going to name names, but places you would think would want a girls in baseball story. And I was told, well, we wrote about girls in baseball 2 years ago. Here's a link to that. And I was like, I don't understand how that's relevant to this news story that I have. Like, I had one place rejected because they didn't feel like there was a good villain. And I was like, culture is the villain. Like the villain is that these girls cannot play baseball past a certain age, that it's a struggle. And so at the last minute, because they were playing a tournament in Miami, and then they were going to be honored. I write about this in the piece. They were honored on the field by the Marlins because they were. It was the 25th anniversary of A League of Their Own, and they had Lori Petty there to throw out the first pitch. She played Kit in A League of Their Own, and I wanted to be there. I thought I can go to this tournament. I can go with them to the stadium. There's so many scenes here that'll work really well for telling the story. And so I was doing that thing as a freelancer. I was like, do I pay my way? Am I going to go on my own and just hope someone takes this story on the other side? And Bleacher Report took it like right at the last second. And they actually put a ton of resources. They paid for me to go, and they sent a video crew. So if you go to the story today, you'll see there's a minute long, great video with interviews and of the little girls talking about their love of baseball. Yeah, and so I went to this tournament, and they had two teams there. They had a younger 10, 11, and I think they had like a 13, 14. And I think the thing that really struck me about these little girls, the thing that sticks with me, and it's right at the end of the story, there was a little girl named Savannah. She was the youngest of the girls there. I think she was 10. And I was just kind of asking her my general questions about, why do you love baseball? Who do you love in the sport? Blah, 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 blah. And at the end, she like said, I want to say one more thing. And I said, yeah, of course, go ahead. And she was like, I want to play as long as I'm allowed to, which I'll just never forget, because I was like, she's 10 and she already understands that at some point someone's going to move her away from baseball. And she can already articulate that in this way. And I just love these little girls. They just loved baseball so much. They loved how upset the boys would get to have to play girls, but they would come up against all kinds of stuff. They were convinced, and I'm sure they're right, but someone would have to really keep the stats on this, but they were sure they got hit by the ball more often, that they would throw the ball at them on purpose. There's just kind of general disrespect. Like one of the games I watched, a kid who was coming into the home base, he like stopped 6 feet out and kind of slowly walked across the plate, because as if like he could, kind of a general disrespect.
Yeah.
The girls get really angry. And they had a tournament once where like all the teams dropped, like multiple of the teams dropped out because they didn't want to play girls. So they, wide range. And the other thing I'll say that I remember a lot is that all the girls were like playing on teams at home where they were the only girl. They all shared that commonality. So most of them, if you look them up, you would find like a local paper, like some reporter at some point was like, oh, there's a girl who plays baseball in town. And they would interview them, and there'd be a little profile about them. And a lot of the girls didn't know, like, other girls played baseball. They just had no way to know that at the time. And so some of the parents talked to me that so they would all fly in for tournaments. They would play, they wouldn't really have a chance to practice together except maybe the
Mhm.
night before. And then they would play the tournament, and a lot of the girls would be very sad when it was over because they would have to leave and go back. And they liked their teams at home. It wasn't as if any of them were upset. There was something different for them when they got to experience the
Yeah.
sport around other girls.
I think that is one of the biggest things when it comes to girls in baseball is they get shifted to softball um, very quickly. When I interviewed Ashton Lansdale,
Oh yeah,
um,
yes.
yeah, she ended up, she told me that she had to just tell her parents, like, I don't want to play softball.
Hmm.
I'm not going to play softball. And I've always found it to be really interesting because that has had an impact on, baseball culture as far as women and girls in the US, would you say?
Oh yeah, I think the thing I always go back to is when Title IX passed in the early 70s. Um, there was just an entire movement, of course, at the time to have sport be more equitable. And so that was exact the same year that Title IX passes when Maria Pepe sued Little League in New Jersey
Hmm.
because she wasn't allowed to play. And and she won because it was discriminatory. And that was the when Little League lost, it was exactly the same time when they started Little League softball. And so you can see in that story, like in that timeline, it's just so clear the way that institutions function in order to shuffle girls off into softball. And it's like, and I always feel like I want to say like softball's great. Like
Right.
I love softball. A lot of the girls who play baseball love softball. They're thankful that it exists because it allows them to go to college and get a scholarship to go to college, and they will switch into softball
Hmm.
in order to do that because there is no infrastructure for them to play ball in college. Almost no women have played ball on the collegiate level in the US. And so, I mean, and that's the other kind of institutional framework that exists. So we have like Little League that has these two paths, but also the NCAA, under the NCAA, but also just like schools in general under Title IX, whoever the federal government Department of Ed has decided many years ago that
Hmm.
softball was equivalent to baseball. So if you're offering a softball opportunity, that's the same as offering a baseball opportunity, which allowed this kind of continued funneling. And yeah, if you want to play baseball as a girl and then a woman, you have to be very, like, as Ashton told you, like very forceful about it. And you have to be willing to sort of put up with the constant questioning. I love whenever if I just tweet about women's baseball, someone's like,
Hmm.
softball. You're like, no,
They're not the same thing.
they're
It's
not
two
the same
different sports.
thing, and they're very different. There's obviously skills that carry over, but they're not the same.
Hmm.
And um, yeah, and so I think it matters that there's like literal structures in place to get girls to go in that direction and to keep boys into baseball. I mean, we talk about boys who
Yeah.
want to play softball, that's its own thing too, right? Because they're sort of shuffled into baseball.
I think that's so interesting that there's so much done to separate based on a game. You know what I mean? Like, keeping women out has kind of been a pastime in a way when it comes to sports and leagues, and better than anyone. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a common thing, and so with that in mind, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation the erasure of women in baseball. And when you were covering the 2018 Women's Baseball World Cup,
Mm-hmm.
you wrote, Women's baseball has a past, their presence declared. Given the sport's evolution, that's a radical statement. The evolution of baseball into the national pastime was accomplished through the erasure of women from the history of the sport. Like, obviously, I read your piece, but what happened at the World Cup to make you say that?
Oh, well, the World Cup was so interesting because it's the World Cup, Women's World Cup of baseball. They can't call it the World Series because MLB won't let them. It's run by the by the World Baseball Softball Confederation, which you guys are all probably very familiar with, the WBSC. And it was every 2 years. They've just now shifted to a 4-year cycle, which they hope will build, will create more international competition in the meantime. So there's
Mhm.
like a strategy there, but there was no one there. Like there was no one at Women's Baseball World Cup. Uh, and I think it's very clear in the piece, like I struggled with sort of how to write about it, because I do feel like there's pressure when you cover women's sports to be very cheery about it, like and
Yeah,
great and
yeah.
grateful. Like I'm so grateful that the WBSC puts on a Women's Baseball World Cup. Um, and that all was true, and I really had a great time, but it's also just so clear how marginalized um, those women are, and it just felt very present. There was like games where like no one was there, there was no media there. That, I mean, that's not quite right. I think in the piece I
You were
list,
there.
I mean,
Yeah.
but there were like 9 of us.
Wow.
There were no men from US media. There were men from um, certainly there was Spanish speaking. I'm just trying to remember what teams were there. Like Venezuela was there. So, and then Japan, they just love baseball in Japan. So there were
Yeah.
people who, and I grew up right near where the Baseball World Cup was that year. It was in Vieira, and which like no one chooses to go there in August, or you shouldn't choose to go there. It's just a swamp. But people like flew in from Japan to like cover it because Japan loves their baseball teams. But the US media just wasn't there, other than there were like 4 women. Um,
That's that's pretty sad. I mean,
yeah, like
I, I don't know. I guess I feel like as a sports fan, you should like sports in general, not
mhm.
necessarily based on the gender of the person who's playing, or, the
Yeah,
sex of the person who's playing. Yet, baseball is considered to be an American pastime, but we don't support American women
no,
playing
I think a lot
baseball.
of people don't know we have a women's national baseball team. They probably think you mean softball, like when you say it,
Yeah, yeah.
if I had to guess. And um, I think there's a lot of girls who play baseball that don't know we have a women's baseball team. I will say, so I'm good. I'm now friends with Kelsey McKinney because she covered it also. So we like hung out all week long,
Hmm.
and she's a defector, and I love her. She wrote a great piece about the Women's Baseball World Cup for Long Reads, I want to say. And then the other person I remember really clearly being there was the MLB.com, maybe. They had sent someone, Allison, I can't pull her last name. And so, like, that was great. That meant that the
Hmm.
MLB.com had a lot of great coverage. And she was also just very, like, we were all, I remember us all being slightly annoyed a lot of the time. Footer, thank you. Thank you, Scott Bush. Allison Footer. Um, and just kind of being annoyed at like what we were seeing. And Allison was, the 3 of us together, I just remember us pushing pretty hard on the people who were in charge. Like there was like 1 shirt that you could buy, and it wasn't even, I just remember it being like, I didn't buy it because I thought this isn't even worth it. It just wasn't representative of the tournament. It was really strange. It's just the stuff
Hmm.
that you take for granted as a sports fan, and then like, there was like 1 place you could buy food. I just the whole thing was very and so yeah, in doing my work on the Women's Baseball World Cup, it really, I'm a historian by training. So maybe I should have said at the beginning, like I wasn't a trained journalist. Like the thing I actually was trained in was as a historian. And I'm always interested in sort of how did we get here? Like you said,
Hmm.
because it is the past, it's America's pastime. And yet this is what it's like for women. And women's baseball, for all of my feelings about women's basketball or like, women's soccer or some other, like baseball is just a whole other level down compared to all of them. So it just, it was like, how did we get here?
Hmm.
And so I've talked to there are multiple baseball historians who study women in baseball. And the thing they love to tell you as soon as you get on the phone is like, women were playing baseball the second they invented baseball. And they really did have to be pushed out. they had to be like on purpose sidelined in order to get rid of them. Like at some point, MLB itself had like a 4 decade long, you cannot sign a woman, right? And I think you probably know more about this than I do. I'm sure that came out of the Negro League signing women and like MLB
Mhm.
freaking out that someone might sign women. So they actually said you cannot. And those are kind of the, you know, deliberate choices that were made by men in charge of the sport in order to, you know, the professionalization of baseball, the sort of like nationalization of it, all those things that were happening. One of the things they did at that point was sort of make sure women couldn't participate anymore.
To stay on the world baseball, when it comes to women in the sport, in October, you and I both contributed to the Global Sport Matters baseball issue. I wrote about managers of color and the
Yeah,
lack
yeah.
thereof, and you wrote about women's baseball, but you talked about how it's growing abroad. And it's almost in like stark contrast to women's baseball in the US. You mentioned countries like Japan, Canada, Australia, Venezuela. How would you say the reception of women's baseball by those countries differs from us?
Japan's like a whole other level. Um, if you want to talk about women's baseball, it sort of begins and ends in Japan. They're incredibly dominant. They've won the last 6 women's baseball World Cups. They haven't lost a game in many, many, many years. Uh, they are just so much better. And that was one of the interesting things for me going in person and watching. You can see it immediately when you watch them play versus the other teams. And a big part of that is they just have a totally different infrastructure than we have here. And it's not great. Like the people in Japan who want the sport to be bigger there are not like, we're fine. I mean, they obviously want it to be bigger, but they just have a pipeline. Like they're the only country that really has a pipeline to the
Mhm.
women's national team, which includes something like 40 high schools that have women's or girls baseball teams. A lot of them are private, but some of them are public. So if you want your daughter to play high school baseball, you might have to move, but like you can. There is a space for her that other countries just don't have,
Yeah.
including the US, especially the US. And from there, Japan, until very recently, had the Japanese Women's Baseball League. It was run by like one dude. And what I was told in October by Hiroko Yamada, who is the president of Women's Baseball Federation of Japan, she was lovely. I really liked talking to her. Um, Hiroko told me that he basically ran out of money. So when you're
Oh
relying on like
no.
a guy to fund your league, so I think it technically is suspended. At least it was in October. It was technically suspended, but there was no, I don't think she thought it was coming back, which was too bad. I mean, it really was. It made all the difference that they could play all the time. Like
I
a lot
mean,
of
they
women's
are.
baseball players don't play
Yep.
baseball that
Hmm.
as much as you would think they would, especially for being on a national team. But they are, she's working with the Nippon Baseball League there, the men's professional league, to have those teams kind of like the NBA did with the WNBA when they first got it off the ground, sponsor teams and then have those teams play each other. And the last I saw, they had a couple big announcements about those teams starting up. So it was interesting also in 2018, Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, I think they played them in the final, and they were great. I thought that team was very fun. I liked them very much. I
Yeah.
liked like their rituals and stuff, and they were definitely
Hmm.
very happy to have made it to the final. But they also had players who played in the Japanese Women's Baseball League, and so you can just see how being able to sort of move through that pipeline and get to the U.S. or get to the Japanese women's baseball team really set them apart. So Japan kind of stands on its own, and for now is just entirely dominant.
Hmm.
Um, and Hiroko was interesting because like she wanted to make clear that it's very fun to win all the time, uh,
I
but
mean, I can imagine.
yeah, but at the same time, she spends her whole life trying to grow the game. And so what she really wants is just way more international play. Like she wants someone to come up and like challenge Japan in a real way. Canada has a good shot at it. Their pipeline is not complete. They kind of have a provincial model, and um, they're growing in ways that are really exciting. So each province has like its own um, organization, and they run. I can't off the top of my head remember which one is the biggest one. Maybe it's Ontario, and they have a really robust system within the province, and they do national championship, not games, tournaments, and through that they're able to tell the girls, we have a national team, you should try out for it. They scout. I talked to the guy, the manager. He was driving somewhere. I think he was going somewhere to scout something. You know, it was like they make an effort to really understand who's coming up in Canada, and so they also have a way to get girls to the national team that, again, the US just doesn't have. Australia's similar. Australia's interesting because, unlike Japan and Canada and the US, baseball in general is not like a Australian sport. The guy there that I talked to kind of said it's a tier 2 sport just in general. So it's not like they all love baseball a lot, and then there are women. It's just not the top of the rung. But he was talking about like one of the issues they have in Australia, and just in, maybe he meant more generally, but like baseball fields, they didn't build them to have women in them. So like he was just talking about like physical infrastructure issues of like changing the locker rooms and making sure that like women have spaces, and those, like, that's part of what they are focused on. And Australia was trying to start up its own league, and then COVID happened. So they were very excited, and then everything just got stopped. And of course, anything that's like tier 2 is going to take a back seat. But he seemed excited about the idea. It was also hard. I was talking to him at a time when like you couldn't go to Australia. And so he's like, really the way that the league would be great is if we could bring players from other countries, and the way that, you know, all professional leagues work, you like importing the best talent if you need to. Venezuela was harder to get information about. I did my best. I have a friend, one of the co-hosts of Burn All Down is Brenda Elsey, and she is a historian who studies women's sports in Latin America. And so she was helping me. And like, there is actually like a league in Puerto Rico. There's a pretty robust baseball culture in general, just in Latin America, obviously. Cuba, I mean, we can talk about the Caribbean. And so Venezuela, I emailed with her because that was the easiest way to communicate. And the thing I loved about her, she was very forceful. Like, it needs to be mandatory that girls can play baseball, that like countries have to participate in this, that there has to be something big in order to sort of change the way that it works. But I'll just say, like, the thing about the US is there just isn't really anything to get girls from youth baseball to the next, the national team. There's just a hole there. And, you know, credit to the MLB. They have stepped up a lot recently. Baseball for All is an organization that Justine Siegel runs, and they've been doing a ton of work for years to get more girls into baseball. And I interviewed Justine for this piece in October, and she's just great. Like, she has gone to all kinds of countries to try to help them get women's teams off the ground. So she does care about it on an international level. But it's like when I talked to the person at USA Baseball about the women's team, I was like, how do they know? And there wasn't really a great answer for like, how do you find out about the women's baseball team so that you can try out for it? You just kind of have you have to Google, if you know, and it's like,
that's so sad. I mean, I feel like other countries, I mean, just in watching baseball around the world, no matter who's playing, it's so enthusiastic, right? You were talking about some of the rituals that you saw. I'm sure there's like
Mm-hmm.
singing and
Yes,
dancing
they have these
and
great videos of like them all in a circle and like moving together. Ah, I loved it. Yeah.
yeah, it almost as if internationally baseball has sort of absorbed some of soccer's,
Yeah.
like rituals and things, and we just don't seem to be a jubilant fan base in the US. I mean, just being honest, I've been going to baseball games since I was a kid, and I like when there's a group of people who's particularly rowdy. I mean, I like to see them, from a distance. I don't want to actually
You don't want them sitting next to you.
I
You just
don't
want them
want to be a
there.
part of the rowdiness. It's
Yeah.
like I always explain it to people in terms of, I live in Chicago, so going to a Cubs game. Like, I don't ever want to sit in the bleachers. I know what those people are about. However, I don't want those people to be kicked out of the
Yeah,
game.
you
You
appreciate
know,
what they're doing.
yeah, I like what
Yeah.
they bring. I think we need that enthusiasm throughout the sport everywhere, no matter who's playing. That's to me one of the best parts of watching international baseball is they kick it. They have a good
It was
time.
so
Like,
interesting it was one of the things that's hard about this is just hard to find anyone who studies or writes about women in baseball. And when I wrote my first piece about Japan back in 2018 before I went to that World Cup, that was a real struggle. Like
mhm.
I didn't have someone like Hiroko Yamada, which she would have been around then, but no one connected me to her at that time, so I wasn't able to talk to her. Um, it was just so hard to find anyone who could talk to me about baseball. I could find people who could talk to me about women's sport in Japan, sort of in a general way. I talked to a guy who's a professor at Yale who knew a lot, but he was mainly a men's baseball. So it was a lot of kind of what he knew on the edges of that. But everyone I talked to about Japan was like, you have to go to a game. Like they all wanted to tell me that if I ever am in Japan, I must go to a baseball game, that it is just a hell of an experience and that I cannot miss it. And I was like, well, I don't really care about I'm not a baseball person. That doesn't
I
matter.
was just
Like
gonna say,
this
I
is
don't think it
just
matters.
you've gotta go. So that really stuck with me. Like all of them wanted to make sure that I understood that that is like something you cannot miss if you're a sports fan.
I've never been to a baseball game in Japan, but I think you should go as well.
Yeah, I yes,
Um,
it's on my list.
I'd also be happy to go. Just let
Yeah,
me
let's do
know.
it.
Let me know.
Yeah.
I love stuff like that. I'm telling you, like I think so. I have friends who are like you. They'll watch the World Series. They'll if a game is on,
Yeah, I'll totally
they'll
watch it.
hang
Yeah.
out. But I try to tell them all the time, you need the ballpark experience.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's some people, some SABR members right now who agree with me. The ballpark experience is it's everything. I think it's what keeps, everyone coming back. Like, yeah, you can get into it on TV. You can even get into it on the radio. I think baseball is one of the few sports that I can listen to on the radio and just get a nice visual for things, that it never loses its romance if you just kind of ignore all of the things happening now, like the lockout. Um, and
Yeah.
I find, like I said, international baseball is just it's so enthusiastic. I mean, just injected into my veins. I've watched the World Baseball Classic and I'm about ready to like jump through a wall every time I see it. It's so good.
Well, it was like
Uh,
interesting. I remember I interviewed someone at the 2018 World Cup who had been to the 2016, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember what country in Asia hosted it. I can't remember if it was Japan or South Korea, but it was in. So we were talking about like, hey, no one has shown up to to watch you guys play baseball,
mhm.
and one of the things that like really hurt was you could see a high school across the street from the baseball stadium and like, I don't think anyone ever went over there to be like, you guys should come literally across the street and see some of the world's best baseball players play baseball over here.
Mhm.
It wasn't like the girls softball team showed up from that high school or something. But I was talking to one of them and they were talking to me about the 2016, which whatever country it was in. I sorry again, we're not remembering, but they had like assigned like church groups and stuff to the different teams. And so you always had a huge cheering section
Mm-hmm.
for your team no matter what. And like they would,
Mm-hmm.
the final was like sold out. It was huge. Maybe it was in Japan. I can't remember. But they were just the way that like her face lit up talking about how exciting that was to play baseball in front of like these enthusiastic crowds. And she's like, I know that they were like assigned to us and stuff, but they were really into it. So I was like, oh, that's so, it's one of those moments, Shakeia, where like you're like there's such potential and you
Mm-hmm.
can see it in these flashes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's possible. So it feels so frustrating when you see that not met at other
Yeah,
points. And so her telling that story, I was like, ah, see, like you can do it, and people will happily get into
yeah,
it. It's not as if they won't. So I mean, we know from women's softball now, like people will happily get really into it
absolutely.
if they have access to it and understand, like know to go and participate.
What do you think what do you think is holding it back? Is it just not enough investment, not enough marketing, not enough like what are
Yeah,
we
all of
getting
it.
wrong there? Yeah, right?
Yeah, it feels like all of it. Um, and I don't know what you do. Like I always kind of feel like this is like the wall you run up against in women's sports is like, so in Japan you had the one guy, and that was great for what as long as it lasted. And so now she's trying to change that to be a more systemic thing associated with baseball, men's professional baseball. Um, and so and then like we see in Canada and Australia, the way that the like government has tried to come in and like create a system there. I don't know. It's like everyone that I talk to about it, they just want more of everything. Um, I don't know. I just like how, I mean, it's sexism. It just
Right.
is.
Yep,
And that's
absolutely.
always kind of a thing that like, what do you do? What do you do about it? Uh, it was one thing that they all did mention to me. So we have the Women's Baseball World Cup, and that's literally it for international competition. And there are moves by different countries, organizations to create more international competition, whether or not that's like a thing for North American countries, or we're talking about like, actual Japan plays America in between. So I think that's like the next sort of frontier. And I think that's part of why I can't say this 100%, but I think this is right that they've shifted from the 2-year model to the 4-year so that you have playoffs and you have that sort of build up like you do with the soccer World Cup,
Hmm.
where the teams have to play each other in lower, to qualify. And so you end up playing more international competition in order to get into what is the big international competition, in part just to sort of meet this need. Um, but yeah, they're just like massively under resourced in general. Anywhere you look, they want more. I think there's just a struggle to even get people to understand, like we were talking about before, that these countries have women's baseball world like or national teams. Like
Hmm.
there are just a lot of places where I think most people in the US have no idea that we have that. And so that's true in most places. And so that's like, it
Um,
seems so basic. Like it's
yeah.
like let's just tell all the little girls that there's a team, but that can be really
I
hard to
mean,
do.
I think, and this is just my opinion, and you can weigh in on this. I think some of it is that where do they go, right? Like for a young girl who is an aspiring baseball player, you already have the obstacle of you probably won't be able to play it as a teenager. Then there's no professional league here. There's nowhere to go. There's just one women's professional league in the world, as far as I know. And if someone has another answer, feel free to correct me. And so they have nowhere to go. Do you hear a lot from young women, or have you heard, I should say, a lot from young women, aside from like major league playing aspirations? Do they ever want to just, I don't know, run a team? Do they want to be a
Mm,
GM? Do they want to, be a base coach?
that's such a good question. And I don't feel like when I was interviewing the girls that was a question I asked them at the time. They
Hmm.
really, when I was doing the piece about the girls in baseball, they were,
Yep.
they were still with the like
Hmm.
starry eyed, I'm going to be the first woman in the MLB. And I thought this is so cute. They all loved Jose Altuve because he was tiny. And so they were like, you don't have to be big. You could be the size of Jose Altuve and still be great. Um, and so I don't remember any of them talking to me about coaching. But then Veronica Alvarez, who has played on the team, coached the team. I think she has coached for some MLB teams as well. Huge supporter of girls travel baseball. They all knew her. She had helped them out. She's been such, I think she might be the coach now of the women's team. I'd have to double check that. But they definitely have a model for it, right? Like if you do anything in girls or women's baseball, I feel like Veronica is there. Justine is the same way, right? Justine has also coached. And so I'm sure that that's true. Like one of the people I talked to for one of my pieces was, oh God, I should look all these names up. This is why I couldn't be an academic because I can't remember everyone's name. Perry, she's an umpire. Perry, she's the best. If you ever get to talk to her, there it is. Thank you, Perry Barber. And she's an umpire, and she like is.
She's probably watching too.
Yeah, Perry, if you're here, hi. And she's like evangelical about getting women into umpiring, and so you have these women out there like doing this work all the time. And so whether or not little girls can articulate that, if they continue at all in even the like the very poor pipeline that we have described, they're going to run into these women that are modeling this for them. And I feel like every day there's like a new announcement about a woman in baseball somewhere. So
lately they really are,
which is,
it definitely shows great. That they could have done it. They could have been doing it all along though. Like that's my argument, at least, right? Like and I saw,
thank you. Veronica coaches with Oakland. Yes. Thank you.
Derek Jeter, recently stepped down from his position in Miami. But when Rob Manfred, I think it was Rob Manfred, when he thanked him for his time, he mentioned, he hired a woman. And it's like, why did it take so long? One guy did it. And now, we're looking at everyone else like, okay, what are you waiting for? Right? Like we're looking at our teams or, whatever is near us, like, okay, it's your turn now. Do you think with all of the movement that we're on track to see a woman in Major League Baseball in our lifetimes? Or do you think this is something for the next generation?
I honestly have no idea. The US is hard. They don't really have it's hard to know if a woman can really break through because it's just so difficult to maintain that level of play that you need to maintain through, especially, your late teens into your 20s. A couple girls recently have played. Did Ashton actually play did she go to college?
When I talked to her, she went to college to play baseball, but she was redshirting that year.
Okay. But I mean, we're talking like, if you Google, there's like 5. There's maybe who have ever played ball on the collegiate level. And so it's just so hard to see like how because the first woman to do it is going to have to be great, right? Like you're not going to be able to just be in the middle of the mat. Like there's going to have to be it's unfair.
I think they're going to give the Jackie Robinson treatment, right? Like you have to be able to tolerate sexist jokes. You have to be able to, withstand naked men and
right. And so it's like whoever it is, whenever it happens. I mean, I do think like it will happen at some point. I have to believe it. I think. And they will be an exceptional person, but they will probably have to have taken like it's just hard to imagine what that path could really look like that put them in that place unless they're like, something naturally about them. But I don't really, like one of the things about women's sports in general is that just all levels of resources are so much less, right? Like they don't have access to the same level of coaches. They don't have access to the same level of physios. They don't have the same kind of nutritionists just across the board, like even in the sports that are bigger and better resourced. And you just think of like what what it is that a woman would have to overcome in order to be able to be there is so hard to imagine. Like, they wouldn't even hire a woman to be a GM until last year, like 2 years ago. These are the people who are going to scout and then bring a woman onto the team. That's just, I don't know.
They don't have anywhere to scout from. You make a good point. It's like its own, it's
Yeah.
keeping itself down. We have a couple comments. Gary says MLB should be funding a professional women's league, even if it was 6 teams to start. It would be a place for the best women players in the world to play. Agree with Gary, agree. I'm actually going to open it up for questions in a minute. I have one more question for you myself. So those of you watching, if you have questions for Jessica, drop them in the chat, and I will read them to her, and we'll get you some answers for whatever it is you want. And then my question for you, Jessica, is I know you're not a big baseball fan, but is there anyone in women's baseball or softball that you're checking for? Like, is there someone who
Ooh.
excites you, a name that you like, she's playing, I'm going to turn on the game?
Mm. Well, that's so funny. It's funny to me that you mentioned Ashton, because she was so good at the Women's Baseball World Cup. She had this amazing, like, you can probably find this if you Google it, like this, the way she plucked the ball out of the air, like, oh God, it was so athletic. It was insane. The best pitcher in the world is Sato, who's in Japan. But she's old. I don't know if I wonder now that they canceled the latest World Cup and we won't have another one until 2026. It's like forever away. I don't know if we'll ever see her again, but she was phenomenal. She's like the kind of person that probably could have played with the men, right? And I don't have anyone in softball off the top of my head. So no, I'm not great about it. Like, I will say it's
See?
very, very hard to follow the sport in general,
Mm-hmm.
to keep up with it. They don't play games. Like, if you're gonna like keep up with the US national team for baseball, like, they're not playing. And
Yeah.
so it's just, oh, there's always kind of a struggle when you're a women's sports fan to get all the information that you
Mm-hmm.
want about the stuff that you are watching. And that is just like a whole other level when it comes to baseball.
We have a question from Tom. Thanks, Tom. Um, before the Japanese Women's Baseball League shut down, were there any non-ethnically Japanese women who played in the league? Specifically, did any American women find an outlet in this league?
I don't think so. That's a great question. And I think no. I think it was mainly Japanese players. There were definitely players from Chinese Taipei who were there. There were like 3 or 4 of them. I think it was mainly women from Asia. I don't think it was any Americans. I don't know how good the Americans are. Like, it's hard for me to even know, like, would they be good enough to go play in the Japanese Women's Baseball League? Because we just don't have a good sense. It's just, we don't have enough data. Like, for a sport that loves
Mm-hmm.
stats and data, we just don't have very much because they just don't play enough. So yeah, I don't think so. But again, I would have to double check that.
From Michelle, as a journalist who has written about violence against women, what are your observations about how MLB handles incidents involving its players?
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, we're going there.
um, so I only pay attention to the extent that I have to, I've got to say. I think no one has it figured out, is what I want to say about it. Baseball has definitely responded pretty, you know, compared to other sports, like, they definitely punish people, depending. I'm always just kind of like, what we just don't really ever know very much. They're not terribly transparent. I don't know what we're doing for those people and to help them. And I think, look at you asking me a complicated question. Domestic violence is often different than sexual violence, because of the way that the person who's harmed is often wrapped up in the life of the person who has hurt them. And so when you punish the person who's harmed, that can often hurt the person who has been harmed. And like, that's all so complicated. And I don't know that I have a good answer for you, whether or not the MLB's done a good job. I definitely know that they have put people, like they've definitely come down on people who the courts have not found, which I'm not the kind of person who thinks like the court is the beginning and end of like who gets to decide that someone has harmed someone else. So I think that that's good, but I would probably have to do more research to have a really good answer for you. And I just don't follow it that closely because I follow it so closely in other spaces, and it's hard to just follow that, to follow gendered violence in general.
A question from Bill. Which sport have you found to have the most occurrences of gender bias and violence?
Hmm. I don't know. It's hard to like compare them because football just has so many players. There's just like a million of them.
Hmm.
So like there's more opportunity. That sounds terrible. Um, and race always matters when it comes to like who we care about doing something criminal. Um, and so if you have more black men in a sport, then we're going to tend to like see things there that we don't see in other places because we're looking for it.
Hmm.
Versus like say the NBA that just has tiny rosters, like there's just like way less people to even be thinking this about. But also the NBA has this idea that they're progressive and that sort of follows them around. And baseball, obviously, very traditional, very white. So it's so hard to like think of comparing them. Um, and I don't know if I could ever compare like bias. I just think that's everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't like know if I can pull that apart.
From Steve. The Iowa governor signed a bill into law today that bans transgender women from playing on girls and women's sports teams in Iowa, including college as well as high school. Your thoughts?
Oh, I hate them. I hate these bills. I wrote a piece for Vox at the beginning of the summer about the idea of fair play, that we have to do this to keep it fair. Um, and I just think that these bills are, solutions looking for a problem. Like, we can all maybe name one trans woman who's like competing in a sport somewhere that we feel is like threatening in some way. It's not a thing. And I just hate that these bills are targeting children. It like makes me really sad actually, and concerned because this is already a marginalized group that we know has so many barriers in front of them and has high rates of suicide. And they just want to play sport, man. Like we're all here because we love sport so much, and I just am in general a fan of inclusivity and working in that direction. Like if you really want it to be fair to women's sports, there are so many more things that you could be doing to
Hmm.
actually make women's sports way more fair, including resources, mainly resources. And we're not doing that. Like they're not passing bills for that. My goodness. They don't actually want to support women's sports. They just, these bills exist to punish trans people for existing. And that bums me out.
Really inhumane situations with these bills, reporting parents for child abuse,
Yeah, I'm in
for
Texas.
affirming their
Yeah,
kids. Like,
and it's very bad here. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? Oh, there's one here. I'm hoping this is a serious question. Don't you think that people need to overcome the idea of women or girls being allowed to play baseball?
Hmm. What do you think that means? Like,
For me personally, what do I think
mm-hmm.
it means? Like, I don't know. I guess I can see some argument there, right? Like, don't fight to be in places where people don't want you.
Oh, but they
But
love to play
also,
baseball.
exactly, I was
They
gonna say, but
love
also,
it.
why not? Why not? Like,
Yeah.
I don't really see an issue with anyone playing anything. And I'm not sure that, I know a lot of people have well, if you put men and women together, men are stronger, men are this. If someone wants to play and they can compete, I don't really see, I don't, who am I to
Yeah.
tell them they can't?
Yeah. I mean, that's the same for me. Like the thing about when you talk to women and girls who love baseball, they just love baseball. Like they can articulate for you exactly why softball is not the sport for them. Like they know exactly why baseball is great, and they just like they must really love it because like what they're up against sucks a lot of the time,
Mhm.
and that they continue to play it in the face of this. Like I really like it's not uncommon for women who make it to the national team to go to college. They learn to play softball very well. The skills translate, or like Michaela Underwood, who like was on the women's baseball national team like a million times. Like she was like the veteran. I think she played volleyball in college, right? So they are these multi-sport athletes. They make sure they are skilled in other areas so they can go to college as a student athlete and have scholarships. And then they, after they're done, they then have to like go back to get the skills again to be able to play baseball on the level that they want to play it. And they do it because they just really love the sport so much. And it'll be nice when we get to the point where people just expect that women would want to play baseball.
I was just gonna
We're
say
so
that's
the bar is so low right now that
yeah.
people don't even expect that women would want to play baseball. Which is why you have to be like baseball, not softball. And then you have to do like, but softball's great. Baseball's different. Like there's this whole like dance that
Mhm.
you have to do to even talk about it because you don't want to look like you're denigrating softball. Like it's it just has so far to go.
I was just gonna read Dr. Heathy's comment because I agree with it. We need to stop seeing women as only an exception rather than the norm, which is what your point was too. It's I tweeted today. Not sure if you saw my question, if those of you watching saw my question. I just asked people to name one woman in baseball or softball who is not a writer, a journalist, a blogger, or Effa Manley. Because
Oh, Effa.
well,
Yeah.
first,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
am probably not the person to explain Effa Manley to, but also it's like it's not known. And I was really impressed
Is
and
the answer Monet
surprised.
Davis?
Uh, actually, no one named
No one
her.
said Monet. Okay, that's good.
No
So
one named
we've moved
her.
far enough away.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
I mean, there were people coming with some deep cuts, of course.
Awesome.
But then there
Yeah.
were people who were naming, college softball players and college players who have become coaches. And so it's like, there's a little bit, percolating and behind the scenes with regard to women in baseball in at all levels and
Yeah.
girls in baseball. It's just slow. It's real slow.
Yeah. I will just
I'm
say, like, if anyone's interested, there are definitely organizations that exist that care very much. I mean, the MLB cares. Like, they definitely are one of the big organizations in this country, almost bigger than, like, more than USA Baseball. And Baseball for All. Like, there are people out there for sure who are doing this work, and you can find them and support them. And I really want to go to Baseball for All's national tournament. They do it every year. Um, and I think that would just be great to see because there are lots of places around this country where there are teams of girls and local teams,
mhm.
and they travel and they all play together in Rockford, and I just think that would be a blast. And so it's
Baseball
out
for
there.
All has a
Yeah.
tournament in 2 weeks in LA. It's a college baseball
Look at
tournament.
that. Justine is trying. She's moved
Mhm.
in, like college is her next sort of frontier because that's where the pipeline breaks at this point.
Just pure coincidence. I'll already be in LA that
Oh, you're gonna
weekend.
go?
So I'm gonna go. I think I'm like
Nice.
I have something to do on the Saturday, but Sunday, I feel like have some brunch, go watch some women play baseball. Um, I think with the lockout, we're all gonna be shifting our attention to other, forms of entertainment, maybe not particularly baseball always. Um, but I'm pivoting. I've been joking on Twitter calling it pivoting to the ping, watching college football,
Uh-huh.
college baseball. So I'm really excited about getting the opportunity for however long this takes, to check out other forms of baseball because Major League Baseball isn't the only baseball that exists, as this group kind of exists to sort of let people know.
Yeah.
Um, if there are no more questions for Jessica, last call for questions for Jessica. Um, if not, Jessica, I want to say Thank you very much
Oh, well,
for
thanks for having me here. Thank
taking
you
the
all
time to chat to
for
us.
your comments and your questions and listening. And it's my one little niche thing that I love so much is women in baseball. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Oh wait, we're getting some comments popping up. I don't want to like close out. People are
Yeah.
talking. Are these questions just comments? Oh, it's just comments. Let's see. I think what we need to overcome is the necessity of women requiring an allowance to play baseball.
Yeah.
Bill says, as a scout that measures makeup, mindset, and coachable chemistry in players, women rule in this area.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
And Stu pointing out that there's more women coming in as official scorers. That was a big blank spot for a while. So yeah,
Hmm.
it is very exciting. Um, if you aren't thinking about the fact that we're starting from like almost nothing.
Yeah.
But still, like it is that feeling of like it's so much better even than like 5 years ago when I was first writing about women in baseball at all. And so yeah, I mean, it feels like the future is bright here, but I don't think we're there yet with, a player in the MLB kind of level. But I would love to be
Yeah.
proven wrong. Please prove me wrong. Whenever I am cynical about this stuff, I'm like, I want to be wrong. So I hope that I am wrong.
Um, I hope that you are wrong too. I really hope that in a couple years I'm talking to you again and we're talking about how phenomenal
Yes.
some woman playing baseball somewhere in the world is, because we're not going to limit it to the US. But thank you again. As Marlene is saying, do check out that list of women on my Twitter. Some people gave you explanations, but if you don't know them, Google them. Google them, share the information, support your local women and girls in baseball and softball. Jessica, what is your Twitter? Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me basically at Jessica W. Luther on all the different socials, and that's my website too, Jessica W. Luther.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.